Hi, Dr. Cindy here. This is going to be a long one. So, if there's nobody that can view live or whatever, that's fine. That's not as important to me as the message that gets across. I was inspired by this, by what I'm going to be talking about. And even though I may digress at points, but I will bring myself back to the original discussion. I'm going to be reading something as well. The subject matter of this session is corporal punishment, and corporal punishment specifically in black communities. I was inspired by a post by a colleague and friend, Paris Shea. Shout out to Paris Shea. She's a doctoral candidate, I understand. And she wrote about whooping on your kids and how it's really not a good thing to do. So what I did was, as I do, and most everyone does, which is the purpose for Facebook, is to share ideas and comments and things like that, and to post your thoughts about things. And so what I did was, I read some of the people's comments, and while not reacting directly to someone's comment, I just decided, okay, let me throw a little historical reference in there, because that's important. As a scholar, as a teacher, as an anti-racist essayist and writer, I feel that it's important to give people the proper historical perspective. So what I wrote was, oh, by the way, I digress for a moment. I'm in jail. My Cynthia Elise Smith profile is in jail for 30 days. The reason why, and I won't be back up and running in that capacity until December the 6th. Now, the reason for that is I posted an article on Tennessee's legislature not even bringing to a vote the concept of neo-Nazism being terrorist, or being terrorist organizations. They wouldn't even bring it up to a vote. And I posted it, and I was called on it by Facebook, where they said that it didn't follow their guidelines. You can take that whatever way you want to. I know what it is. I mean, I'm a recidivist when it comes to Facebook jail. So I've been in a few times, okay, for a whole lot of things, and I expect it. So I have another account, my Cindy Smith account, which is my I'm in jail account. Now, not a lot of people have that account. I don't have nearly the number of friends on that account as I do my other one. But that's why I'm posting from this as a post. But I will put a direct post onto my main page on the wall when this is done. So, that aside, let me go back to what I was talking about. It is corporal punishment in black communities. And it came about as a result of a very, very good post from Paris Shea. She got a number of responses back from them, and I decided to chime in. And so I said that it's a direct result of conditioning reaching back to the enslavement, when the enslaved would beat their children so they could show the massa that the children weren't, quote unquote, spoiled, meaning they were compliant and not rebellious, and because massa's beatings were far worse. Now, understanding the visceral reactions that people get who either have lived through corporal punishment as children and or who administer corporal punishment to their children. You know, there are any number of justifications that are made for it. And there's an amount of, I think it was cognitive, I always get that wrong, I always say cognizant, but I mean cognitive dissonance associated with the fact of corporal punishment and how it relates to our children and how we raise our children, that God forbid we should even consider that it has anything to do with slavery. Now, I'm just going to say right here, I was having a discussion with my husband today, and when I finished, he said, Cindy, in my 50 years, I never knew this. And this is why I think it's so important for people to understand when I say everything circles back to the root of white supremacy, racism, and the enslavement. We must acknowledge this for us, those of us who are the descendants of the enslavement in America. Now, I asked him, do you know where spoiled came from? Do you really know what spoiled meant before it meant what it does today? And he said, no. I said, okay. And are you aware that beating our children is a direct result of the enslavement? And he was, no. I said, okay. Here's what you need to understand. Back during the enslavement, you must understand that children that are born, whether they were slaves or not, but the enslaved children born into it, they didn't come right out being little slaves, being little compliant little things that just do what the master say. Many of these children fought against it. It's in your natural self to fight against that which is trying to destroy you, your soul. Okay? And they would be beaten unmercifully by the master, by the masters and the whatever they called them, the people who were in charge of beating children and beating the grown-ups. And what these parents would do, and trust me, this is out of love. And I actually did a post about, and it's called A Mother's Love. If you want to check that out on my website. It has to do with the woman from Ferguson who was shown beating up her son because he was throwing rocks or doing something that was so frightening to her in her mind that she felt she had to beat him in the street to show the people, whoever was looking, that I don't play this. My son is not going to do this. What she was doing was, even though it was wrong on so many levels, what she was doing was protecting her son from what would have been worse. See, we don't see it that way. Now, that is what the mothers and the fathers would do with their children. They would beat them. I beat them. I beat a messer. I do it. Okay? Because they felt that their beatings would not be half as bad. But trust me now, they used to beat them. They had to beat them badly in front of master sometimes. But this was so that the master wouldn't hurt him. Wouldn't kill him. Okay? Because they would kill him. Just kill him. Okay? Because they knew they could get more. So if you loved your child, you would make your child as compliant as possible. You would beat your kid. Okay? All right, I don't want to belabor that point. But the thing is, there was one poster that actually really took it personally. So what I did was I apologized because, in fact, I even went on to say that I know that perception is 100% to the perceiver. to and in that regard, in order for any meaningful dialogue to take place after, or say this particular person might just read this thing that I'm going to be reading to you guys, I had to apologize because she said I offended her. She used the word whoop, and I used the word beat. But as far as I'm concerned, it's the same thing. Whoop, beat, spank, smack, hit. It's still laying hands in a punitive way on your child. Okay? So let's talk about where it came from. I found an article. And the article is by Stacy Patton, PhD. Love her. This is an article in the American Psychological Association, and it's by Stacy Patton, and was written in 2017. And it says here that in 2015, a Pew Research survey found that black parents are more than twice as likely as white and Latino parents to use corporal punishment on a regular basis. And they are far less likely to never spank. So that's kind of a double negative. But what that says is they are far more likely to spank as opposed to never spank their children. While hitting children is prevalent in black communities, contrary to popular belief, it's not an intrinsic cultural tradition. I need for people to really pay attention. Black people, black family, black people, pay attention. Black parents have legitimate fears about the safety of their children. And the overwhelming majority believe physical discipline is necessary to keep black children out of the streets, out of prison, or out of police officers' sight. And far too many parents argue that whipping their children is a distinctly black tradition. This belief, however heartfelt, is wrong. Let me repeat that. The belief that whipping children is distinctly a black tradition is wrong. Black children are more likely to be assaulted, seriously injured, or killed by a family member than by the police or neighborhood watchman. Yearly statistics consistently show that black children are mistreated and killed significantly higher at significantly higher rates than white and Latino children. Ample scientific evidence demonstrates the long-term damage resulting from physical punishment, even without marks or other physical injuries. Black parents who hit their children not only risk drawing the attention of Child Protective Services, who are overrepresented in communities of color, but also having their children placed in foster care, which is a pipeline into the juvenile justice system and similar adverse paths that disproportionately impact black youth. Indeed, black children stay in foster care longer, often don't receive adequate therapeutic services. Okay, it goes on. I'm going to put a link to that. In fact, I did create a post and I put a link to that on my wall for those of you who may want to read further, because I'm not going to read this entire thing, but I did want to go into the historical roots of corporal punishment in black communities. Psychologists could lead in educating communities of color about the connection between corporal punishment and the racial disparities connected to the practice. But first, the profession can benefit from a better understanding of the historical roots of corporal punishment in black communities. You got to hear this. I applaud Stacey Patton for this, okay? I applaud her for this. African Americans adopted the practice of beating children from white slave masters. Europeans brutalized their own children for thousands of years prior to crossing the Atlantic to the New World and colonizing Africa. Historians and anthropologists have found no evidence that ritualistic, forms of physical discipline of children existed in pre-colonial West African societies prior to the Atlantic slave trade. Do you understand what's being said here? There is absolutely no evidence. West African societies, and you have to understand that this is where the bulk of African Americans came from during the slave trade, was from West Africa. So West African societies held children in much higher regard than slave societies in the Atlantic world, which placed emphasis on black bodies as property, not human beings. West Africans believed that children came from the afterlife, that they were gods or reincarnated ancestors who led profoundly spiritual lives and held extraordinary mystical powers that could be harnessed through ritual practice for the good of the community. In fact, it was believed that coercion and hitting a child could scare off their soul. Indigenous people of North America held similar beliefs. As colonization, slavery, and genocidal violence made life harsher for these groups, parenting practices also grew harsher. Whooping children is not a cultural practice that Africans brought with them to this continent. Do you understand, black people? Black family, we did not bring that practice here. That was not what we did, but you have to also understand that everything that we were was effectively destroyed when we were brought over here. When our ancestors were brought over here, it was all destroyed. I could actually start crying now because historians estimate that about 12.5 million Africans were shipped to the New World before 1865. And about 1/4 of the captives who crossed the Atlantic were children, defined as anyone shorter than 4 feet 4 inches. The average age of captives was between 15 and 20 years at the beginning of the 19th century, but dropped to between 9 and 12 when the abolition of the slave trade was imminent. I'm so sorry. I don't mean to cry. It's just that it's so profoundly disturbing that they took children and young adults. People, you just need to understand what they did and why we are the way we are today is a direct reflection of and association with our past as descendants of the enslavement. But it doesn't have to be that way. You today can choose to break the cycle. You can sit your children down today and you can say, children, mommy, daddy are no longer going to put hands on you. We are no longer going to use that as a form of punishment, because discipline doesn't have to be a verb. It doesn't have to be an action taken punitively. You know I'm a wordsmith, and you know that I look at words and I dissect them. And discipline is a noun. It is something. It is a thing, a discipline. Okay? What a discipline does, not does necessarily, but what a discipline is, think of learning. Think of knowledge. Think of discipline as a basket full of knowledge that makes you an expert in that, within that basket full of knowledge. Okay? So, understand that discipline does not have to be a verb of action. It doesn't mean punitive action. I discipline my kids. No. That's because discipline don't have to be a verb. Discipline can be a basket of knowledge that enriches a person within that basket of knowledge. Okay? That's a discipline. Scholars know what disciplines are. All right? Anyway, I digress. I'll go back to... Anyway. The fact that the majority of captors were young is significant for our understanding of the evolution of African American child rearing practices. Bringing over mostly youth, coupled with the violent suppression of West African cultural practices, meant that the traditional African child rearing practices faded the same way that African language and religious practices ultimately did. Remember what I said. Whipping children is not a cultural practice that Africans brought with them to this continent. We didn't bring it here. This ain't something we just always did. It's a direct result of being enslaved. Look up spoiled. And I don't mean the one that they use today. I want you to do some research and look in deeply. Do some deep research and find out where the idea or the ideology of spoiled came from. And I guarantee you're going to find the enslavement root of it. Because spoiled little black children meant that they weren't going to be compliant and good little slaves. So they had to be beat. Okay? Anyway. Let's see what else. Once in America, slaves as parents were under tremendous pressure. Here we go. What I say. Slaves as parents were under tremendous pressure to shape their children into docile field workers and to teach them proper deference and demeanor in front of whites. Otherwise, they could be spoiled. Child deaths, brutal whippings and torture, sexual abuse, and being sold away from their relative for the rest of their lives were constant features of plantation life. So just like that woman in Ferguson, saw her son out there about to throw rocks at the cops, and knowing that them damn race soldiers were going to shoot him dead, she ran over there and said, "No, Mother, don't hit my child. Let me beat him. I'll beat him." And she went over there and commenced to whipping his ass. And guess what they did? She got on national television. She was exalted. She did a good thing. She was a Good Morning Friggin' America, I think. I did a post. I call it a mother's love, and I do have a video in that post on my website, www.calise, ALEASE, so that's calise-writer.com. Look up A Mother's Love, and I examine that concept from the standpoint of the historic nature of what it was she did. And this right here is that documentation of why she behaved the way she did. I'll beat him. No, I'll beat him. That was love. It wasn't. It was twisted. But she was trying to save her son. So for that, I give her a pass. Anyway, I told you I was going to digress a little bit in this thing. Can't help but I'm going to go back to this again. All right. After slaves were emancipated in 1865, yet still not free, the rules of racial etiquette and the ritualistic beatings continued as a new kind of coercive Southern labor system emerged that depended on black child workers. Okay. Once again, whites co-opted black parenting to make sure it performed the same kind of function in freedom that it had during slavery. With sanctioning from the black church. God damn you, black church. You know what? Y'all need to get your act together. Instead of trying to become mega churches and, providing entertainment for all the money you're getting, start doing something. All right, I said that, but I ain't even going to start crying again. I'm pissed now. Okay. Black parents enacted the master's lash to instill obedience. Their reasoning was simple. Prepare black children to deal with the chronic stresses they would face to keep them alive. If black people had the luxury of 20 or 30 years after slavery able to parent without fear of lynch mobs, indiscriminate violence, and unyielding racist discrimination, then perhaps the practice of whooping might have become less widespread. But when you belong to a group of people who are in constant fear of their lives and those of their children, which we are today in 2018, then it is understandable how that trauma can cause parents to interpret cruelty as love. The Ferguson mom. Read that essay I wrote. It's called A Mother's Love, and it's on www.calise-writer.com, calise, ALEASE-writer.com, and it's called A Mother's Love. Even though it's proven as counterproductive, they see it as love. This is the way it's been interpreted. So the use of corporal punishment in black communities today is a byproduct of centuries of slavery. We're not talking just years or decades. We're talking a byproduct of centuries of slavery. The racial terrorism of Jim Crow after the centuries of slavery, and exposure to racism that continues to chip away at the vitality of Black life. Black parents have been encouraged to be part of the dehumanization process. We are encouraged to be part of the dehumanization process. What did I tell you? She was on TV. They were exalting her as a great mom. All moms ought to whip their kids' asses. It's been that way before America's founding. Yep. So, as I said, on my wall, there's a bit of commentary on here related to this. And I also put a link to that. You'll find it on my Cindy Smith jail account wall. And I'm actually going to try to see if I can fast forward it to my Cynthia Elise, my real wall. And I said, when discussing whooping, spanking, beating, or whichever description for what you consider, quote unquote, discipline for your Black children, there is always a visceral reaction from people who have experienced it as well as those who practice it on their own children. The cognitive dissonance associated with it is striking. Nevertheless, it is important to understand the roots, the historical reference on corporal punishment in Black people. And then I tell you to read this article. Read the article. Understand it. I'm just doing a little something here, a little housekeeping. Okay. All right. Anyway, that's pretty much it. It had me really, 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 really bent and upset. And like I said, I had that discussion with my husband about it, and he's 50 years old. And he had not even put it together. And that's what a lot of us do. A lot of us forget slavery. We forget that association. We forget that our past is what has determined where we are today. Ain't no shame in being a descendant of the enslaved. I have no shame. It wasn't my fault. It's like the woman or the man who's been raped, and the perpetrator blames the victim. It ain't my fault that I'm a descendant of the enslavement. It's not my fault that I'm living within a system of racism that wasn't created by me, but was created for me, to subjugate me, and to perpetuate the continued dehumanization of our children through so many means, including ourselves as corporal punishers of our children. You know, this is why I say sit down with your kids. Tell them, you know what? From this moment on, I'm not going to put my hands on you. I'm going to talk to you about the things that are out here. And I'm going to talk to you about consequences. What that word means. That there are good consequences and there are bad consequences as a result of actions. And it can be done. I did it with my kids. Why? Because they're human beings. And I'm not going to sit up here and say that I didn't break down a couple of times and give a spank, beat. But you can count on this hand. And my oldest is 42. And they only remember one. And even then, I apologized. And then I sat down and I explained to them that mommy is trying to learn a better way to communicate with you because I know this is wrong. This is not the right way to parent you. Talk to your children because they are human beings. And then you'd be surprised how kids understand you. Even my grandson Grayson, 4 years old, he understands. You just have to learn yourself how to speak to them. And you ask them, do you understand what I mean when I say this, this, or that? And they'll say. They'll tell you. They'll talk to you. They'll talk with you. Start here. Start now. Decide that discipline is a basket full of goodies. Is a basket full of knowledge and understanding for your children. It's a noun. It's not a verb. It's not an action word. It's not punitive. It's not something you do to them. It's something you do for them. It's something they can have and hold on to. It's a noun. Before I digress and talk about other stuff, just understand, do your research, read that article. Look on my wall, my Cindy Smith wall. Read that article. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.